It's my first time doing this, so apologies if I make many mistakes. This is the wonderful Danny Cohen BSC, cinematographer of The Film Room. A great day movie for anyone that needs something to do on Valentine's Day, should be out around there. As Nigel was saying, a great director needs a great cinematographer. It's your first collaboration with Lenny. I just wanted to start by talking about how that collaboration got started, when you first started talking about the film, or if you talked about previous films.
Yeah, I talked to Lenny a few years ago about a film that in the end I couldn't do, so I'd spoken to him a couple of times. And then when he basically signed up for this one, he then rang me again. Unfortunately, I was able to do it, so that's actually what kicked off. So it was, we met once in London, and then the next time I met him was in Toronto, which is where we shot it.
Yeah, read like in prep kind of thing.
Yes, it was quite a swift signing on and getting going.
Off on the best way. And so, I don't know, the audience might not be aware, but the original concept of the film comes from a novel written by Emma Donoghue, who also adapted it for the screen. And I've read the novel, and it's quite specifically first person. It's sort of Jack's perspective on the world and that kind of thing. How, obviously, Emma adapted the screenplay and adapted her novel for the screenplay. How did you, Emma and Lenny, talk through the move from sort of obviously it's got a very first person technique, but to go from just being Jack's perspective to being Jack and Ma as a shared protagonist?
Yeah, I think so Lenny and Emma did spend a fair old amount of time adapting it, and I think what became clear to them was one of the key things. Yes, it's like a lot of it is from Jack's point of view, but in the novel there's a ton of voiceover which can work on the page, and I think they really wanted to almost get rid of the voiceover. So it was very much you saw the story unfold before you, as opposed to being told the story by the kid. So that was, I think, a very smart move to make it less about the voiceover, and it's more what we see, what Jack sees.
So like experiential, you feel the space.
Yeah,
feel the story.
Yeah, and I think and it all, what's clever about it is that even though the first 40 minutes is in the room, and the room's only, 12 foot square, it's not a very big room. To really kind of understand it from his point of view, so to us it's a very, very enclosed space, very claustrophobic, and there's nowhere to go, and it was always the intention that we wanted to, as much as possible, make this feel like a complete world. And he says it a couple of times in the film where he's never bored by it. It goes on forever and ever, and I think that's because in a way it's like you don't want to undermine the whole story, because I think that's the point is that he's escaping into an even bigger, into the big wide world. But when you're in the room for the first 40 minutes, it was, when we were shooting, it was all about making it as interesting as possible and not to make it feel like a prison from his point of view, as opposed to Ma's point of view, which is the exact opposite.
Yeah, I guess.
Chris, can I interrupt just a second?
Do you want
we need to move that microphone so we can hear, please.
Okay.
Thank you very much indeed.
And I guess like the sort of macro photography of room helps you to expand the world. So one small patch of wall becomes like a continent of knowledge.
Yeah, and I think that it was all, there's a lot of that going on, but it's also, once you kind of go down that road, we had lots of conversations about the production design and the detail and the texture of the room and all the elements in room. So what's quite interesting, it was a very small, finite space, is I think endlessly we discussed what all the props were and the, you know, at a sort of micro, macro level. So there were great conversations about the yellow spoon and how distressed the yellow spoon was, or what sort of drying up rack there was. And, you know, so it went from every single prop that was in vision. We sort of went through everything to sort of create the colour tones very much on set. So we didn't really want to spend ages in the grade sort of twiddling with things. So we kind of went through everything at a sort of macro level to really make it feel like it's a world that old Nick could have put together through second-hand stores or just junk, you know, yard sales or whatever. So it was never, we didn't want to overcomplicate it, but make it feel as sort of authentic or as real as potentially something like that might have been. And then it also went through to things like the light fittings. You know, we had endless conversations about how many practicals there were. Like, so there's a fluorescent above the sink, there's a bedside lamp, there's the red rad heater, single element heater, and the little keypad for the door. And so that, you know, we had lots of conversations about the colour of each of those.
And so you use those as motivational sources for the night scenes and for when old Nick comes in.
Yeah, exactly. So, or in days, you know, so when we sort of got our head round about the quantity of lights, if you like, and then those were the handcuffs because nothing was going to change. I mean, that was the other interesting thing about doing something like this, is that you can often cheat a little bit with sets because you only visit them every now and again within the script, whereas for the first chunk of time you're there and nothing changes. So it was very sort of important right from the off that everything was look-wise consistent, made sense for all the scenes that were going to play out. You know, like how the bedside lamp would fall over and get dented in the fight, and then, you know, all this sort of minutiae was quite kind of
just feed through with the story as room evolved.
Yeah.
Kind of, yeah.
Because there was no sort of going back once we kind of shot. I mean, I think basically shot it chronologically, so there was never going to be a chance to fix anything really. So we had to kind of get it right from the very first frame.
And what was the design of room in terms of the logistics? The studio space that had obviously 4 completely floating walls that you could make any size and any.
No. Because I think that was the other thing. We kind of ended up basically making the choice to keep it as complete as possible. Because I think as soon as we messed around with the size when we were prepping it, about what physically was the smallest space we could work in, and we always wanted to shoot with 2 cameras because of the kid and not to miss anything. So it had to work for us in that we always wanted 2 cameras to cover everything. And what we didn't really want to end up doing is having to float walls, just because it felt you kind of sort of slightly mess with what was going on. I mean, we did have inevitably a roof that kind of folded up, and the way I plotted the lighting was that all the insulation tiles on the ceiling you could pull them off, they were just stuck on with Velcro, and behind them was a spigot. So you could end up.
So you could move the skylight around the room,
skylight could shift
or
a
just
little
the
bit.
top, you know, or just a.
But it was all the little bits and pieces. If I wanted a bit of a side light or a backlight, or to put an edge in, we could very quickly put a kino flow up, a small 2-foot kino, and sort of fixing it and powering it was all sort of built into the set. So it only took moments. So it kind of. The theory was that we'd light it very much through the skylight for the day stuff, so we had quite a lot of light outside the skylight that we could manipulate for different textures of light, like hard light, soft light, kind of soft ambient light, or strong sunlight.
Yeah, was it a conscious choice to just use the strong sunlight for that one scene where?
Yeah, I mean, because I think it's.
That.
Yeah, I mean, I think we just because it was, I think of all the scenes that felt like. You know, it could look visually, it could be quite a punchy scene if you had a nice shape on the wall. And I think what we were up to is not to repeat ourselves too often, sort of with the lighting. So we're constantly mixing it up a bit, and sometimes having sort of a bit of hard light in a corner, or a chunk of hard light on a wall, or just overall kind of grey winter light. So I think that
like variation in colour, temperature. And
yeah. So we tried to plot it, but there was a logic to it, and where we kind of looked at where if we put the skylight on the side it was on, theoretically in that part of the world, how the sun would travel through the day and hit which bit of the room, so you could kind of identify the time of day sometimes.
Yeah, like map out how sunset would feel. Like.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And so, was the keeping the room a room kind of part of the sort of performance structure, trying to keep Jacob in character and dealing with like immersing. Was he 8 years old?
When we shot it, I think he was 7. So he plays 5, but he was in reality 7. So that was on Lenny's part. I think he always wanted. I think he's got his own kids, and he kind of knew that trying to direct a 5-year-old was probably a disaster waiting to happen. And so he kind of always knew he was going to have to cast a kid slightly older and play it younger to kind of be faithful to the book. But I think definitely having the ability to light it, or put flag arms up and put a small light on the end of a flag arm and dispense with any stands on the floor, I think that helped Bree and Jacob. It just gave them a bit more flexibility about where they could move, but also it didn't intimidate Jacob. I think not having stands and flags and standing on the floor in his space, I think it definitely gave him a sort of comfort zone. It wasn't lots of clutter and film equipment, and so not breaking down the walls, I think also lent a kind of degree of that it was a real space, if you like.
And there's quite a clear delineation between the production design of Room and the production design of the outside world. Room is, as you were saying earlier, is kind of colourful to a certain extent and really heavily textured and very intimate, and then the outside world by comparison is sort of very neutrally coloured, has huge panels of either wood panelling or flat colour. Photographically, how did you deal with that combination?
Yeah, I think again it was one of those things. I don't think we wanted to make Room look like a dungeon, because I think that in the book it's a hermetically sealed world, but it isn't colourless and lifeless. It's his world. He's been in it for 5 years, so I think you'd do a disservice if it was just grim, desaturated, miserable. I think that's what makes the story really work. Is it's a world and he lives in it, and there's lots of interest. There's lots of things that he does. It's just on a very small scale.
Yeah.
So you kind of felt that the choices were to elevate it to a degree. It isn't his prison, it's Mars' prison. And then kind of the opposite happens when they escape and they're in the real world. It wasn't to make it feel like it's amazing. It's there's having that degree of it being mundane, kind of keeps your sort of feet on the floor, and that they might have escaped, but it's still a crap hole because of all that they've gone through. So you didn't want to kind of fill it with colour and soft cuddly toys.
Yeah, I guess, like responding to, when Mars looking at the photo of her and the track team, and she's sort of saying, do you know who these people are? And Jack's obviously no. Yeah. And they're like, well, yeah, nothing's happened. Yeah. They just got about their lives.
I think there's lots of things. I'm just sort of picking up on the Room and having gone out of the room. I think one of the things we definitely wanted to kind of emphasise was the Mars bedroom definitely echoed elements of the room. So there's a cupboard that he plays in with the same sort of slatted doors, and so kind of repeating stuff that in a way makes him comfortable. So I think there's a lot of things going on once you kind of watched it a few times. There's kind of, I think he's kind of referencing his own, or Lenny was using elements in the real world to reference what had previously gone before.
Yeah, I guess repeats Mar's prison as well. Like she leaves one room only to return to her former
Prison.
Like teenage prison where her life hadn't quite begun.
Yeah.
Never knowingly underheard.
Thank you very much.
Can I ask you a really boring question? What did you shoot it on? Camera lens choices. I already know.
Yes. We shot it on the Red Dragon and Panavision Primo spherical lenses. In a combination of 5K and 6K, depending on wider lenses were at 5K, I think.
Okay, for lens coverage and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. And is that a system you've used?
Yeah, no.
Or
Yeah, I mean, all combination of. Yeah, I mean, I've done other films with Reds and Primos. That I think. Yeah, but that was the first time I'd used the Dragon.
and what were the purely colour choice reasons, or for camera system, or was it logistically?
I think in that instance it is more logistics purely because it is a bit smaller than the Alexa. So I think that was the logic. Was it just even saving a couple of inches, making it slightly more compact, did us favours because often we were absolutely squeezed up against the wall. I mean, we could within the room itself. We did, I think we took one wall off once, but other than that, it was pretty solid. But what we did have was the capacity to move the cork tiles and take out sections. So every 4 cork tiles.
You could shoot through a wall.
So we always wanted to have the lens within the room, but the bulk of the camera, if necessary, could just be back from the actual wall. So physically, we could poke the camera through a hole.
Okay, so you could shoot from the inside of the bed, does it work?
Yeah, exactly. So there are quite a few shots of Ma or Jacob lying with their face to the wall. So that in that instant, we just take out a couple of panels, and you could have the lens, inches away from their face. But if you weren't able to do that, then you'd have to push everything 2 foot into the room, and you'd lose that.
And it'd be a bigger cheap than just.
I think so. Yeah, when it's that small,
bigger, cheaper performance.
The bed would virtually be up against the other side of the room, so it makes it geographically no sense.
Paying too much attention to you and not looking at my questions. Does anybody in the audience have a question at this point, so I can now look at my questions? Nick or Tim?
Did you or the team refer to Bad Boy Bobby at all in the play?
No.
Are you aware of the film?
I'm not. No. Huge. I don't think.
Australian or New Zealand?
I think it's Australian. Rolf de
I
Heer.
don't think I know the name, but I don't think I've ever seen it. I don't think that came up in conversation. I mean, what's quite strange, when we were thinking of films to kind of reference, as you do when you sort of kick off with prep, there weren't that many films there's the, I've forgotten the name of the one set in a coffin, Buried. Yeah, so that's one, but that's even in an even smaller space. I think the one film that did kind of make sense and we did look at was Come and See, the Timov film, just because it was about the journey of a kid through, horrendous narrative. But there weren't
Subjectively told as well.
Yeah.
It's Bad Boy Bobby. I think it's an interesting comparison because again, it's a film of 2 halves. The second half is far more bonkers than it is in this.
Right.
This is much more real and tender. But the first half, there are striking similarities.
Right.
I don't know, to Nick now.
I was just going to ask really about the choice of the stock or centre. whether you went into other cameras, did testing, what did you find, or was it primarily to do with the compactness of the camera unit? You had it's a wonderful, incredibly naturalistic feel you got out of it that suited the piece completely. I was just wondering whether you intended it, as it were.
We didn't shoot that many tests. I think I knew from the start that I'd shoot it on the Red Dragon. I'd done a film before that was I'd shot on the Red Epic, and so I was quite comfortable with the look of the camera, and I think the improvement they made on the Dragon is it just dealt with skin tones a bit better than the Epic. But we didn't shoot that. Inevitably we didn't have a huge amount of time to do tests and stuff like that. I think the other key thing was to shoot as wide open as possible, just to really screw over the focus pullers. Just because
some of the sort of macro close or the very tight close-ups, are they the 50mm T1?
We did have. That's right. So we had the normal set of Primo sphericals, but there are a couple. I think they're called EZ lenses, and there's a 50mm 1.2 and a 24mm T1, which they've been around for quite a while. But they have such a narrow depth of field that was quite I think it's that thing about having a very, very...
It's like the cheekbone to ear is just, soft and blooming.
Yeah, and it was a nightmare for the focus pullers, but I think they did an amazing job. There was literally the width of a hair was the amount of depth of field they were playing with. So, but it just lent, I think having that sense of fall off just did make it look quite interesting.
Yeah, and I guess when you're treating an extreme close up in the same way, I guess narratively the widest shot in room is a shot of a single wall, like 6 feet of wall. So the extreme close-ups have to have the same level of separation as a regular close-up on a regular set.
And also it's just I think that they did have really interesting faces. So I think it does hold up having huge faces. And the frame was always, again, it's like they're being boxed into the frame on the screen, and so it's just like echoing that, which is all I think constantly what we were up to.
Yeah. So in general terms, with your work, the performers tend to do quite well at award season. So it might be something to do with you. So could you just elaborate a little on your approach to working with performers and what you feel is, because you tend to operate at least one of the two cameras most of the time, just elaborate a little on your process of the performer-cinematographer relationship.
Yeah, I think that what I definitely try and do is not have to do it in a way where that you don't want to intimidate people, especially because Jacob, he was 7 and I think he'd done a couple of films before, but he wasn't a seasoned professional. I don't think he had time to be a seasoned professional. So as much as possible not to have large amount of equipment knocking about, and just to try and do it and have a small footprint for what we were actually doing. And I think that what that gives them as actors is just a bit more freedom, not to tie them down to having to land on a mark or so all the time. I think what we were conscious of is to just let them have the space to do what they wanted to do, and as much as possible there weren't any limits, even within room. So we had the ability to, if it went to a shot that was 360, then that wasn't a particularly big deal. And I think it's the same. I think it just gives it, I think, an atmosphere where they're not intimidated by people poking lenses in their face. and it can give as natural a performance as that you'd hope to get.
So zero restrictions, so they don't feel, as a character, if like mid scene they want to leap across the room or jump on the bed or whatever, then it's all allowable.
Yeah, I think we did that with Lenny. I think there were a few scenes where I didn't have a clue what was going to happen, and then even that's I think makes it interesting from operating the camera is you don't quite know how it's going to play out, and I think that's always important in the sense that if you're watching, if you're the viewer, you don't want to you don't want to have been telegraphed anything about what's going to come next in the story or where they're going to go, or what they're going to do. So always, in a way where rehearsals are useful because you get an idea of what to expect, but specifics, I think you want as when you are operating not to be conscious that this is going to happen, that's going to happen.
Yeah, not predicting the movie.
Yeah, not kind of
not foreshadowing.
Yeah, exactly. I think that is quite an interesting. I mean, I've read somewhere that on Breaking the Waves, the operator didn't speak the same language as Lars von Trier, so they had no means of communication. And I think that's even better in the sense that you're absolutely clueless about what was going on set, and then what the dialogue was, and what to say. It's I mean, whether it's true or not, I don't know, but you just get the sense that knowing absolutely nothing can definitely, it'll be a very, very unique view of how the story plays out.
Yeah, responding to action and space and immediacy. And so, did you apply one aspect of like your kind of philosophy for Room? Is that something that you bring to every project?
It does change. I mean, because I think some films it has to be far more controlled and intelligible. So I think it's flexible. It has to be
you're on a 10mm at 2 foot.
Yeah, so you can't. Yeah, I think I don't think, like all films, I think every film's completely different. No scripts are identical. So I think to have the flexibility to be very controlled if that's what's required, but then be completely clueless as to what's actually going to happen, because that'll just lend something completely fresh to what you're about to shoot. If that makes sense.
Is there another question from the audience at this point? Nigel.
Danny, when you received the script of this film, extraordinary film, you must have realised that you were in fact shooting 2 films within a film. And you had this extraordinary opening where, because of the set, because of the writing, you were in an unusual environment which you created magnificently, and the images to go with that. Was there a dilemma in the second half which was much more ordinary? In how did you work that out in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the appeals was that to begin with, you're in the room, and that's quite, it's a very small room to film in, and then it was like we constantly think. So then the scenes play out in the wardrobe. So we thought we conquered filming in a very small room. Now let's film in a space that's 2 foot by 2. It's even tinier. So I think that was constantly how do you kind of reduce it and reduce it and reduce it. And then I think the opposite happens when you get out of the room. I think one of the key things was to make it feel quite mundane and boring. I don't know if boring is the right word, but just not uneventful. So I think that was also, Lenny was very much, say, casting the character of old Nick. I think he did have, you could have cast anyone, but he always felt that just to have somebody who's pretty dull and uninspiring, and it's, I think, making those choices where it isn't sort of crash bang wallop. It just, it kind of tells a story, I think, in quite a clever way.
Yeah, I guess it helps to set up the kind of Mars sort of Stockholm syndrome decline, where obviously the dependency that they had for each other isn't there anymore, and therefore there's sort of no point in
going on. Yeah, and I think that's also. I mean, things like I like the way the story sort of crosses over. So he's in the prison. Sorry, she's in prison, and he's in a world that has known nothing other than. And then when they escape, he's in a world he just doesn't understand, and she's back in a more familiar prison. I think there's lots of stuff like that where it kind of the story keeps flipping within itself.
Yeah, and I guess at the outset you kind of feel as a viewer that Mars' response to returning to the outside world will be the successful one because she's been there, and that Jack's going to struggle because it's enormous. The world is so big, but it's the reverse simply because the things that have happened to them in room set them on a sort of a collision course.
But I think going back to your question, I think one of the things when I read the script, what really appealed to me was that there's these two completely different sections, sort of split by a 5-minute action film, and I think that's something you tried to kind of stick together in the sense that the escape. In any normal film, that would be the end of the film because you escape, you're free, and then everything's hunky-dory. But then, so that kind of, to make that as intense as possible was quite interesting.
It's your little, like, Bourne style set piece in the centre, but then... Yeah, and I guess it's an anticlimactic epilogue.
Yeah.
That goes on for... Is there another... There is a question.
I just wondered what the discussions about aspect ratio were and whether you ever considered having a different aspect ratio for one part and another for the other.
Yeah, I mean, we did talk about it, and it just felt it's, you could have I think if you'd have shot room 4-3 or something like that inside, it could, it would fit very snugly, but I think just to have one frame size that was consistent in the end, you sort of would ask the question, why change the frame size? It's like, it just felt you then bring in an element of inconsistency that is, I think it's not about the frame size, it's the story, that's the format, and then that's the story.
And why did you go for that then?
I think it's just, the sort of contradiction in that you're in a room that's that small and shoot at widescreen, just because it does feel more cinematic, even though it's a very, very small room. I think there's something about just it feels more cinematic.
Yeah, I mean, it felt ample.
Yeah.
It felt like there was somewhere to go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Any other questions out there? Oh no, I've got to return. Go on, someone have one. Have I got to return to my sheets? Yes, I have. So, I might have remembered this incorrectly from a previous conversation, but the last few films you've worked with Adam Glassman at Goldcrest, formerly Company 3. Yeah. But this film was coloured in Ireland with Gary Curran. Did you use a form of the ACES?
Yeah. So that's the first. Yes. I'm slightly clueless. So there's a new standard that I think it's American studios are driving it, which is a system called ACES, which is, I don't know what it actually stands for, but it's to give a consistent workflow from the grade through to projection in the cinema, and the idea is to restrict the gamut, so the fluctuations in areas where it could change are kind of restricted. But I'd never quite understood why that was an improvement on the system that still exists in the vast majority of places where you go to grade. Yeah. I mean, it's quite interesting to have that degree of control, but it's slightly flawed in that it's not it's not industry wide. So there are all these places that don't use it. So the inconsistency is why try and push it as heavily as they are pushing it.
Yeah, just trying to make it universal. And did you notice any great differences between grading on the Dragon other than skin tones, as we mentioned earlier?
No, I think that was the main. I mean, it's got the same. I mean, roughly the same dynamic range as the Epic. It might have been improved a small amount, but say the dynamic range is as good as the Epic, and it was just the rendition of skin tones felt slightly truer, and you had to fiddle with them less than previously. So, yeah, I think that was the main reason we ended up.
And you tend to use mixed colour temperatures quite a lot for your. I don't know why you explain it. I don't know.
I think in the end, a lot of the time you have to be a realist. So there's only so much you can control, especially on practical sets where you might have a vast wall of window. I think what the look ends up being is having a mix of colour temperatures just gives you a bit more shape within faces and within locations. Is that it's not a wash of a single colour of light. It does kind of drop away, and it's slightly bluer there and warmer here. So I think again it's just something that changes what you're actually watching in interesting ways.
Like a way of dissolving the artifice.
Yeah.
And bringing reality back into it. It's air. There's 3 questions and a microphone at the back. If we could start there, that'd be great.
Oh, Jesus, sorry. So in the room it felt like it was quite a strong narrative piece and there was a plot. And then when Jack escapes, it felt very sensory. And I wondered if you could talk about how you're trying to visualise his experience once he was out in the real world.
I think you just answered your own question. That's it exactly. I think as much as possible, when he breaks out into the world, the bigger world, it was to get a flavour of, if you never had to experienced anything like it before, all the kind of things a kid might look at or touch or feel or see, so just kind of heightening that experience. I think that's what we were up to. And also kind of, when we were looking at locations, I think one of the places we looked at lots of options was the hospital. So his first experience of the world, the morning after he's escaped, we had a lot of choices. It could be an old, slightly tatty room. It could have been a hospital room on a ground floor. But it just felt like sort of going for something a little bit more high tech and with a bit of height. It's something he would have never experienced, in his wildest imagination. So it was kind of choosing locations that really kind of were things he would never have comprehended. So, in the sense of vertigo, he looks out of the window straight down, he never would have sensed that degree of height. So that was quite interesting. And then, like when he touches the floor in the hospital with his toe, it's like what I think trying to make the audience think that's the first time he would have touched a Formica that may or may not have had underfloor heating or something, so it's kind of, we were trying to pick up on everything that comes his way and sort of make the most of it.
I guess I was just trying to think. I guess by reflection, the way that Ma is viewed is continuous. As if nothing has changed from Rue in a way, like the framing of her photography.
I think what her experience is, I think that her sort of jumble of emotions that kind of sort of crash out in the way she relates to her parents. I think that was always quite interesting. You know, again, I think you don't want to kind of give the game away, or you don't want to kind of foretell anything. So again, it was like, how do you kind of not make a meal of it, but keep it interesting.
Audra has stood up, which means we're running out of time. Is there another question from back there?
First of all, wonderful film, very moving. Just a quick question about cameras, not what you used, but would you have preferred to have shot it with one camera? I know you had a very young actor, so you had two. Was that just for safety, or could you have done this with one with an older actor?
No, I think the logic for two cameras was partly because he was very young. We didn't ever want to miss an interesting performance. So what that meant was a lot of times cross-shooting or doing two sizes on him. It gave us the option that the way they interacted could be, could be for real. And I think that definitely, it's that thing going back to making them comfortable that they might not necessarily have repeated what they'd done. So not to get reactions simultaneously, I think that was a kind of key thing.
Just at the front. But yeah, so I guess the idea being that it's whenever somebody did something unpredictable, that unpredictable thing was captured twice. And
no, because if you're cross-shooting, what the idea was just to get
that unpredictable thing and the response to
and
it.
Exactly. So you kind of you get it in, you get scenes or bits of scenes in one hit, and I think repetition's always going to be quite tricky with a 7-year-old. Say, do it again, but so you could get the whole thing again, but then they'd never kind of be identical. So having that option that as a piece works and you've got both sides of the conversation, that was kind of the logic.
So that first performance is spot on and the most natural, and that's the one that can play the scene.
Yeah.
And now we can have this question.
Fantastic film. The question I had was something that you've spoken about a little bit in this talk already, and watching the film and hearing you speak about it, I was interested. There's a sense in which you're having to work almost against yourself in a sort of interesting double way with this film. You're having to show us that Room is a prison, but that it's infinitely various. You're having to show us that the world outside is both extraordinary for Jack, but quite boring and suburban for the audience. So we have a kind of, it's almost a dramatic irony, isn't it? We can see something that the characters can't necessarily see. You've spoken about a couple of ways that you've tried to make this contrast evident, that you didn't want to repeat yourself with the light sources, that the aspect ratio allowed you to see something wide when the sort of the set was narrow, as it were.
Yeah.
But I'm probably less well informed than everybody else in this room, but I wonder whether there are any other technical, specifically ways that you tried to allow the audience to experience this almost subliminal contrast in what we know and what the characters know.
I kind of said it all. No, I don't. I mean, no. I mean, we kind of. I think we sort of technically. I think we had one or two crane shots in Room. So, but I think again, it's one of those things where the practical reality you couldn't use it very much. So you kind of very much, because we start off in quite a controlled way within a very small space. I think, there's a crane shot at the end of the film, but there weren't, so it was things like, the reality was you don't want to be to do one thing in the room in a very sort of very specific, strong style and then never to repeat it. So keeping it consistent and doing vaguely the same thing all the way through in all aspects. I think that was just to have a visual consistency that kind of felt quite sort of, simple way of doing it.
Yeah, and your tendency towards subjective coverage and kind of immersive with characters. runs through.
Yeah, and I think also, that thing about it is subjective, but it does change. So sometimes it is Jack's point of view, sometimes it's Mar's point of view, and it's not to be too dogmatic about the shots we were using. So it's kind of, I think it's definitely, so sometimes it's handheld, sometimes there's not. We didn't have kind of great theory that was going on.
Yeah, was there great philosophical angst about jumping into old Nick's shoes?
No,
temporarily.
No, because I don't think you really do, and weirdly, even though he's the perpetrator of the crime, he's a very insignificant character in the film, I think. So he's on screen for a very short amount of time. You don't see the violence he's perpetrated. So the story is centered, around what he has done, rather than who he is as a character. Because I think the story is about Ma and Jack, so it's very, he's peripheral. So, and I think the way he's played is quite, quite not irrelevant, but it's just throwaway in a way.
Yeah, the film, I guess, is about the recovery from the crime, and he's just a bit part in the recovery process.
Yeah. And there were scenes that we shot. There was a big scene that, I think it was cut before we shot it, but there was the whole sequence of them arriving at a police station, getting questioned, and there's a whole kind of police procedural thing that made more of the old Nick character. But in the end, it's like that's not really the story that they were telling. So it's in the book, but it was kind of, it'd be a waste of 10 minutes of screen time to dwell on it, I think.
Yeah, and doesn't really impact on the character development of Mara and Jack.
And the outcome, exactly. So like, I think in a way, what the sort of, through the edit, it was all about throwing away stuff that isn't absolutely the sort of nub of the story.
Audra is now looking very nervous. Do we have to wrap it up? Question?
I was just thinking, just what you were saying about, kind of to contradict what Tim asked about, kind of trying to differentiate too much the two different worlds. I think the really important thing is that it's one person looking, or two people, but mainly one person, and actually thinking about the widescreen. That very much allowed you to keep at a child's height and in his frame of vision. And there was a real sinister moment, the scene where Leo and he become friendly, where Leo's head is framed out. And that's really an echo of old Nick.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important, that it's one person looking and keeping that kind of the nub.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of things going on in the sense that the Dr. Mittal character was cast because he had a beard. So he's the second person that Jacob saw, or second man after old Nick who had a beard. And I think that was, so there's a lot of kind of clever stuff going on that I think blink and you miss it. And we did a lot about the height of the camera in relation to both of them when they were in the room. So kind of always slightly low, giving you the sense that it is Jake's point of view, to a degree.
And there's an interesting use of the TV camera crew to unravel. That's pretty much what unravels Ma.
Yeah.
Is the questioning of motives for holding on to Jack.
Yeah. And again, it was quite. I think that we had a bit of fun in the sense that we shot that sequence with the 2 Red Dragons and then 2 Sony cameras, and I think we ended up using a lot of the live action footage, but graded some of the red footage to feel more like Sony footage, to kind of, just kind of not make it too slick. I think that's definitely a sense of trying to mess it up a little bit.
It kind of feels like like the interrogation scene of a criminal but viewed by Jack, and that gives it the kind of the three perspectives.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
Hello? There we go. Hi, I just wanted to say, I was really interested in what you were saying about how so much of the choosing the shots and everything seemed to be in production and the idea of shooting on two cameras. And I was quite interested in how involved you were in shot choices in pre-production and how much that was the director.
Yeah, I think, you know, on like with all things, is that you talk about stuff in prep and you kind of get your head around, you know, visually what you want to do when you start shooting. But inevitably, what you don't have in prep is the actors and rehearsals and a notion of how things are going to play out. So I think you do have a kind of list of what ideally you'd be up to. But I think inevitably on the day, so many things change, and you know the script definitely moves on once you start shooting, so the script changes. So I think there's always a balance between what you've done in prep to kind of have a film that's shootable to what the reality of actually when you are shooting. So that's always quite an interesting split of how things go down.
Yeah, I guess also trying to reflect and reinforce what you've done previously isn't always best done in the cold, dimly lit production office.
Yeah.
But midway through the shoot, when you go a little bit tired.
And I think that's I think it's so much. When you're actually shooting on a day-to-day sort of basis, there's so many things that influence choices. Like when we were filming that, towards the end it was -10 or something. So just the cold had an impact on how we worked and what we could do and how long Jake could spend outside. When he's dropped on the floor during the escape, it was minus going into night time. It was easily -10, -15 or something. So you're never going to have him for very long to be lying on a snowy floor. Being barked at by a huge dog. So then the choices kind of end up getting quite limited, and you kind of have a very small time frame to get the shots you're after.